well documented that the CIA tested the effects of LSD on hundreds of unsuspecting subjects in the 1950s, and that the government withheld treatment from black syphilis victims during the infamous Tuskegee experiment. Not so well known is that many other Americans were used as human guinea pigs. Our program reveals how government agencies exposed millions to toxic chemicals and radioactivity without permission, and, according to critics, without regard for the potential dangers.
Say, and the only people who have been doing this, that is biological experiments on the American people, is the military themselves, which has been admitted from everything from Operation Shad to the spraying that happened in San Francisco, I believe back in the 60s and the 70s, that literally killed people.
Again, I may not be able to ascribe intent, but what I can say is that it is expected that there will be increased mortality as well as the potential of a huge host of unknown pathogens that we are subject to, and this is not based on speculation. There's a whole arena of biological research that we haven't even begun to touch on.
Got a license to kill, but not with a gun.
Got a license to kill, but not with a gun.
We'll spray them like bugs.
But have nowhere to run. We're gonna dump tons of poisons out into the air. Aluminium, strontium, and barium. Trying to stop us if you dare. It'll kill off the plants, the birds and the bees, and happen so slowly.
No one will
most people won't see.
A commander who can control the weather has a weapon as powerful as any Air Force. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. military began seeding clouds along the Ho Chi Minh Trail to create floods and wash out North Vietnamese supply routes. It was known as Operation Popeye, and crews flew over 2,000 spray missions.
I was told initially by a friend, he said his brother was in the military service. He said when there is these heavy spray days when there's lots of persistent contrails to keep his family inside, when they were outside exposed, to have them go in and take showers. And he couldn't talk about it. He couldn't explain more than that.
We have extensive studies that the civilian aircraft, the airliners, were laying plumes that basically dissipated within seconds to 2 minutes. The military aircraft in the same airspace laid plumes lasting
4 days.
Ridiculously resilient ridge is a direct result of, again, global network of ionosphere heaters like HAARP, like the HAARP facility in Alaska. These installations can and are creating massive high-pressure zones. When the massively powerful radio frequency microwave transmissions, millions of watts, are focused on regions of the upper atmosphere, specifically the ionosphere, the transmissions cause an electrical chain reaction in the ionosphere which radically heats that layer. The expanding bubble of heated atmosphere pushes up and down. The downward push is the creation of the high-pressure dome. This is not speculation. The U.S. military has long since admitted to the existence of such facilities. The stated purpose of heating the atmosphere and creating the expanding regions I just covered is this: to create resistance to a potential incoming ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, and thus to reportedly defend against it. But the blatantly obvious climate modification use is never mentioned. What else do the high-pressure zones allow the weather makers to do? These zones allow them to steer the upper-level wind currents, the jet stream. Why would they want to do that, many ask? The upper-level winds are the key to steering and controlling the weather. That's exactly what they're doing. Back to the ridiculously resilient ridge in California. This ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure dome spins clockwise in the atmosphere like a giant gear in the climate system. The jet stream must spin around it, up and over it, and then back down in the lower 48 states, further to the east of the fried and dried West Coast. This creates a massive dip in the jet stream. Welcome to the recently named polar vortex. This is how this is constructed. The climate science communities make up the terms as they go in order to cover the tracks of the climate engineers and to give legitimacy to the newly created scenarios that are directly related to climate engineering. By the way, this includes the naming of about 12.5 new clouds that apparently never existed before. When you give a name to the cloud, like undulatus apparatus, sounds very official, sounds very natural and scientific, even though it's a result of climate engineering. The population accepts that, and thus is all too happy to stay in their denial, not noticing the otherworldly skies above their heads every day with jet aircraft spewing toxic aerosols into the sky to modify the climate. Now, to connect all that I've just described to so-called Winter Storm Benji, which was just engineered to bring a small shot of patented chemically ice-nucleated snow to the most populated regions of the U.S. and the East Coast. This snow is created with moisture drawn straight from the record warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. How does that work out exactly? Here's how. The jet stream spins clockwise, as I stated. In the western U.S., jet stream goes up and around that, rotates it back downward around a counterclockwise rotating low-pressure zone. Again, high and low-pressure zones created with ionosphere heaters and aerosol operations. This low-pressure zone spins counterclockwise. So picture a fan on the front of a car with a fan belt spinning around various wheels, and that's exactly what you have happening with the jet stream. Spinning up and over the high pressure in the west, back down, spinning counterclockwise around the low pressure, like a gear, with a fan belt around it. That low pressure picks up moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, and that moisture is then streamed up through the southeast along the east coast of the U.S. The moisture is then saturated with patented chemical ice-nucleating elements. And you can search this on geoengineeringwatch.org, by the way. Search geoengineeringwatch.org, chemical ice nucleation for weather modification, or geoengineeringwatch.org, engineering winter snowstorms, etc. But the chemical ice nucleating are then sprayed over and into the mic.
Don't they?
Certainly.
So what's new? Give us the big empathy, first of all.
Well, I would argue of all the causes that people are spending their time with, countless causes that are valid in and of themselves, George, against the backdrop of a collapsing climate system and a collapsing biosphere. And I realize how many people will roll their eyes and walk away at that statement, because it's simply something that none of us want to believe is happening. But I would ask everybody to abandon ideology, preconception, and bias. Look at frontline facts. This is not a political issue. This is about life on our planet. And in regard to any political side of the fence or environmental groups, all of whom are ignoring this issue, immense hypocrisy. The bottom line is it's happening, and anybody who does any honest, objective investigation, George, will come to that conclusion. On the current course, we're not going to be around long. None of us.
And it's happening. Why? Is there money involved here, Dane? What's fueling this?
This is important. It's an important question, because many people have convinced themselves that if bad things are going on, it's just a matter of money, and that's the bottom line. But it's not the bottom line. And somehow people think if someone's making money on it, maybe it's not even happening at all. And that's certainly not true. And I would point out wars, George. We all know people make money off of wars, don't we?
They sure do.
Does that mean the war didn't happen? Or the people didn't die? Doesn't mean that. So in regard to the collapsing climate, yes, we have disaster capitalists all over the board. But that doesn't mean the disaster is not real. And that every attempt to, in fact, the attempt to make money off of it, which is certainly going on. Climate engineering, I would argue, is perhaps the largest covert money-making venture for the defense industry and much of even the airline industry, which we believe data indicates is being fully subsidized to keep their aircraft in the air, because their aircraft are also being used in these programs. We know that. We're not guessing. We have up-close photographs of the nozzles mounted on the pylons of commercial carriers. Your listeners can look at all these photographs at geoengineeringwatch.org. They're mounted on the pylons aimed into the exhaust jet stream to make this look like condensation. So there's money being used everywhere in this situation. And we have too many people that, in exchange for a paycheck and a pension, George, will continue to help sink the ship with programs that are simply, ultimately, a matter of power and control. It's not for the greater good overall. Absolutely not.
Dane, the skeptics, if they come up to you and say, come on now, where's the proof? Show us what's happening. Prove it. How do you combat that?
Well, to start with, George, if people don't believe what they can see with their own eyes, likely not much I can tell them. It's hard to wake someone who's pretending to be asleep, isn't it?
That's right.
So if people can't, with any sense of deductive reasoning, look up and question why one day is a grid pattern, the next day is nothing, with similar atmospheric conditions, why one trail could be horizon to horizon with an aircraft next to it, similar altitude, leaving nothing, why a trail that's coming across the entire sky just turns off like it's been cut with a knife, why you might have a whole day of spraying at nighttime, and there is spraying going on at night as well, but more often than not, we will see a backing off of the aerosol operations at night in their attempt to allow some of the radiant heat to escape back up in the upper atmosphere. And George, for those, might I explain for your listeners that don't know what climate engineering, geoengineering is?
Sure.
Okay. Quite simply, it's the attempts to manipulate Earth's climate systems. The stated purpose, primary stated purpose, solar radiation management, to try to reduce some of the sun's incoming thermal energy to mitigate the warming that's occurring from a buildup of greenhouse gases. But George, as you know, when you put a reflective layer of aerosols up, you not only reflect, but you trap it.
Trap it. That's right.
Exactly. And you do a long list of other very cataclysmic consequences also.
You create what you're apparently trying to prevent.
Correct. And then bottom line with geoengineering, they can and are creating short-term, highly toxic cool-down regions at the cost of a worsened overall warming. And George, don't we have the pharmaceutical... I cite this example a lot because people relate to this. How many pharmaceutical commercials do you see every single day on the TV?
Well, they're all over the place.
So you take this new pharmaceutical for a certain ailment, and then you start to listen to the list of consequences.
Right at the end, that they give so fast, you can barely understand it.
But the list is so horrific that you can't imagine why anybody would allow themselves to be a test subject.
If you take this pill, your arms will fall off, your toes will fall off, and your eyes may. I mean, it's just unbelievable stuff.
But yet people are, they're buying into this. They continue to take these elements, and certainly, if one really stands back and looks at the wider picture, I would argue that it's hard not to conclude we're living in a Orwellian insane asylum where black is white, up is down, day is night. Every other commercial now is asthma, allergy, Alzheimer's, as if that's something you can expect to get as you get older, dementia, a host of other issues, and again, the toxic. We're back to the toxic heavy metals.